So your new book, Fishwife, is out today. I love this book. Congratulations. Can we start by talking about the framing of the book? Maybe would you want to talk a little bit about why you call the book Fishwife?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. I'm so excited to be celebrating this with you. Um, really the title came from just an investigation into the word wife. And so I kind of stumbled upon it, probably Merriam-Webster dictionary online. And the definition of wife is a female partner in a marriage, or maybe and or a woman acting in a specified capacity. And the example that they had was fishwife. And I was like, fishwife, let's click on this and see where this goes. And then fishwife, is literally a woman who sells fish, but also has become slang for like a misbehaving, vulgar, like mean woman who is prone to shouting. And I was like, I have got to like hold this word very close to my heart. So then it kind of sent me down a research rabbit hole, and I looked at a lot of dictionaries and encyclopedias and really ended up doing this kind of like investigation of language, and the role of, wife, historically and culturally. So then it just became this kind of like questioning of these norms. And I guess in terms of framework, the book is really the speaker's attempt to like embody kind of a new positionality in relation to the term wife, or to the concept wife. So ultimately trying to resist wifehood as a central identity while it still kind of remains a term that the speaker embraces. So fishwife, just like I love the word so much that the whole project came to life.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so if I had to choose a theme song for this book, I would pick Beyonce's Texas Hold'em. Do you have a theme song in mind, or is there a whole Fishwife playlist?
Well, I love that, you thought of this song for this book. And there is a Fishwife playlist, I'm working on it, but I don't really listen to music when I write. I know a lot of people, like, find that to be something kind of inspirational, but I kind of need complete silence. And so, like, I've been trying to think about different, poems in the book or different feelings in the book and, like, where they relate to particular songs. But I think that Texas Hold'em is it really resonates, because this ain't Texas, but it is Oklahoma. In a lot of ways, Oklahoma is at the heart of the book. But tornado, hiding in the basement, like whiskey, dive bar, like all these elements from the Beyonce song, like definitely are they in the book. So it really makes sense. There's also this, you know, um, lyric running to the first spot that we find. And I think that kind of speaks to the poem too. Like this, not only, we're running away from a tornado or something unsafe and trying to like find a safe place. So I think in the book that often becomes like a relationship. Like here, we're like running towards this relationship, and this is the first good one, the good place that we found. So we're just gonna, stop here. So that really resonates with me. But I think, the songs that kind of come to mind, um, thinking about the book, are this great song by Stars called Your Ex-Lover is Dead, um, which, the title is a little dreary, but there's a few lyrics in there which I think really kind of highlight some of the feelings or emotions in the book. And one of them that's repeated several times is live through this and you won't look back. And, definitely the book is like entirely a looking back. So it's not looking back, but I think there's also like an element of like living through this, right? And then reflecting. And there's also a line in there that says, I'm not sorry I met you. I'm not sorry it's over. I'm not sorry there's nothing left to save. And I always thought it was nothing left to say until I looked up the lyrics for a conversation today and was like, oh my goodness, nothing to save. Like that kind of changes things for me. But also this idea that, we have these relationships and sometimes they end and sometimes they go on or transform. But that, there's not like we don't have to be sorry, about that. So I hope that comes across in the book as well. So that one really pops into my head. But then also the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song "Our House." So the book, it kind of ends like on like firmer ground, like thinking of houses, and like speaking of like a safe place, right? And there's this really great demo that's Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell, and they have this kind of like discordant piano that they're playing, and they're kind of the lyrics, and they swear, and it's really, but it's still like the loveliness of the song remains. So that one, I think, for me, feels like the conclusion of the book, like this kind of like, here we are in a house, like it's not perfect, like we haven't got the song totally down yet, but there's like a sweetness there. So those are some that resonate with me.
I love that. Beautiful. So reading this book, I realized it had its own logic. Let's call it fishwife logic. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about that.
I love that fishwife logic. I'll embrace that for sure. Definitely, I think we have the as writers, as poets, we have to, well, the speaker's not always the poet, right? And so it's important to make that distinction. But definitely in the book, the speaker is often the poet. So the book, the logic, I think, of the book follows kind of the trajectory of my own life, but it's not always chronological. And I think of it a little bit like, the Hitchcock like camera trick, where there's like a zoom in while like panning out or dollying out. He does this in Vertigo, where Jimmy Stewart's character is looking down like the very long staircase and becoming dizzy. And so it's like this really disorienting move. And so I think about that in the book a bit, where we do have like kind of this moving forward of the speaker, like in time, in space, like in place, but also there's like a consistent reflection. And so there's like this weird this weird kind of push pull, like a non-linearity, even when like the narrative implies some kind of linearity. So that, I guess, is maybe the illogical logic of it. But also there's like a specific movement from kind of like water or unsteadiness, like being on a boat, like on a sea, to kind of like ground at the end. So there's almost like an atmospheric move. Um, but it's also, I think, informed by character. So there's like the speaker is a character that kind of, evolves or changes over the course of the book. But there's also these tarot card characters, and some, like the magician, right? Like the high priest, like some that we see in tarot decks, and then some others that are my own invention that are kind of either, real characters or amalgamations of characters. Some are invented and kind of fictionalized. So those characters also are kind of like touch points, I think, along the way. But there's also, thinking about Fishwife, it makes me think of like witchcraft, and, crones and hags and, healers and midwives and women who historically and now kind of challenge this male logic. And so I think that that's part of it too. The logic is like more of an embodiment of this kind of like woman behaving badly or woman misunderstood, or like woman operating outside of like the traditional or heteronormative norm. So I think that informs the logic as well.
I love that you brought up tarot deck characters because I could really see a whole fishwife tarot deck. Like if you broke it
Mhm.
down,
Oh, I
it's
love it.
yeah, and I feel like maybe on the back side of it, out of each card, you'd have a poem, but on the front side, I mean, I feel like you could have a whole tarot deck of just different versions of the fishwife. That's how
Mhm.
multiple the speaker is for me in this book.
Yeah. Well, let's do it. Let's let's design it. Let's make it happen.
So, okay, I want to shift a little bit to talk about revision, particularly because I'm always talking to my students about revision. I'm sure you are too. Are there any strategies that you think are really helpful?
Oh, I mean, this is so tough and so individual. I mean, the writing process is so solitary and individual, and then revision is like even more complex. I think it's hard to do, and then it's also hard to describe what that process is, right? I too like talk about this with my students, and for me, it feels like an itchiness. Like if I'm reading something and like I feel a little itchy, like it's not quite right, you know? So I think there's like this kind of just trusting your instincts, right? But really just like reading, reading the work, read it again, read it aloud, and when you get to those parts that make you like a little itchy or whatever the, whatever the bodily feeling is for you, like that's where, that's where we can kind of focus our attention. But I think too, I really love some of like the playful or like really disruptive revision techniques where, you cut apart the whole poem and then put it back together, or like reverse it. The first line becomes the last line, second line becomes the second to last line. So I've done that a couple of times, like those really kind of like big swings in revision, thinking about like, okay, this poem, I like what's there, but it's just not working, and the itchiness is all over. So the whole thing just kind of needs to be upended. So I think there's those kind of big swings that you can take that can really pay off. Um, but a lot of times I think it's just that especially the reading aloud. I know for me that that's a big one, in identifying like places that need, a little tinkering. And so some poems need a total overhaul and some just need, kind of a finer touch. And I think it just comes from knowing yourself as a writer, trusting your instincts, and then just doing it over and over again.
Well, speaking of doing it over and over again, are there any poems in the book that have been revised like 20 times? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm so interested in the poems that you really have to wrangle with, like the poems that absolutely need to happen. You have to say what you need to say, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of the poems in this book feel that way. They feel urgent, but then you can't quite figure out how they need to look and sound and feel.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of them are heavily revised. I mean, I think there's a couple that came out, like, mostly fully formed, um, especially, like, towards the end of the project when I felt like, "Okay, I have kind of the amount that I need," but, maybe there are some moments that need some filling in, and so those poems came, I think, a little bit more naturally and, a little bit more fully formed just because I kind of had in mind the end product. But the long poems in the book took a long time. So really the reason I looked up wife, the definition of wife was because I was writing a poem called Wife. And I have always been kind of like a short form person. Like if a poem is a page or, maybe a page and a half, I'm like, okay, that's enough. I admire people that can write really long poems, and I have just never felt that that's my forte. But then I found myself, writing these like very lengthy poems. So I had this long poem called Wife, and the first iteration of it, um, had kind of like these narrative moments and then also like a thread of kind of origins and etymology, like looking at kind of the origins of a particular word and then those definitions. And then there was something that was like a little bit more like embodied and visceral and more lyric than narrative. And so it was all over the place and it was long and it was unwieldy and I didn't know how to section it. And I was really lucky to be at the Vermont Studio Center, which is just like a beautiful place, and to just have like a couple of weeks to really work on the manuscript. And so I just like printed out the poem and pinned it up on a cork board and like moved things around. And that kind of helped it snap into place. But even then, I still, went through it again and again and just kept finding new things to add and remove. And so that one took a very long time. And then the Crown for Forgetting, which is the sonnet crown, also took quite some time as well. It started out, the first few sonnets stayed the same, but then they followed a completely different trajectory in the original. And then kind of I had a breakthrough where I broke the form, and then it seemed clear kind of what the poem needed to be. But both of those I, revised for years, a lot of time.
So I had the very good luck of meeting you at Bennington, where we both did our MFAs. How many of the poems in Fishwife came out of that experience?
So there's a handful that have made it into Fishwife. But really, that, and yes, lovely experience at the MFA program, especially at Bennington. I really, it doesn't compare to anything else. um, so the thesis manuscript that I had when I left, I was sending it out, and I felt really, it felt strong to me. I was getting good feedback. But then I started a PhD program and I was writing a lot. And it was just, it was new work that was really exciting. And that had happened too at the very end of Bennington. In my last term, I'd put together the manuscript and was revising, and then all of a sudden, all these new poems came out. And my advisor at the time was like, keep it, keep like set aside, don't send it out yet. Like take a couple months to like start to put this new work in. Um, so I did that and then, was writing more and more. And so I ended up taking the thesis manuscript and really distilling it down to what I thought were the strongest poems that were absolutely necessary. And so that became a chapbook. And so I published that. And that really was like the thesis for me from Bennington. Um, but a handful of those poems are, really important to the trajectory and the logic of Fishwife. And so they're in there. So speaking of like revising for years, some of these poems have been around for a while. So they're in there.
Yeah. So what was the best piece of advice you got at your Bennington MFA?
Yeah, well, besides the fact that, like, at the end, I was writing new work and my advisor was like, "Take a breath and, like, keep going with this new work and see what happens." I came into Bennington with, like, a very specific idea of what I wanted to write. I was like, "When I get out, I will have a book about this." And I was working with Ed Ochester, rest in peace, just, like, the loveliest person in the world, and he said, "It's fine to have a project," but he said, "You're just starting, just do the reading, just do the writing and see what happens." And that was such great advice, because then I went in a completely different direction, and wouldn't have followed it if it hadn't been for his advice. I would have been trying to fit everything into a box that maybe wasn't the right box at the time. I think the second thing was I had written a number of sonnets, and admittedly, they weren't very good. And one of my advisors, said, like, just don't put these in the thesis. Like they're just not really that good, which was good advice, but it also really made me like want to write sonnets because I wanted to prove them wrong. And so that's how the sonnet crown came about too. I was like, I got to keep writing sonnets until I figure this out and kind of crack the sonnet code. And so, well, hell, I'll write a sonnet crown, not just one sonnet, but a whole bunch of sonnets, and like really set the challenge for myself. So I think too, like if you have someone kind of push back on your work a little bit, sometimes that desire to like kind of prove them wrong or to prove to yourself, like, I can do this, can also be like a driving force. So I think definitely, doing the reading, doing the writing, seeing what happens was the best advice. But also in some of the challenges that I had to my work, that was inspirational as well.
I love that. So after Bennington, you went on to get a PhD. I did not do a PhD in creative writing, so I don't have a sense of what that's like, but I'd love to know more about your experience with that.
Yeah. I mean, I was just so in hyperdrive after the MFA. Like I was so inspired. I just wanted to keep I wanted to keep going. And I had also just started teaching. And so I knew just from the colleagues that I had, that having the PhD would be a little more competitive on the job market and probably like higher pay. And I know that's not true for everyone, but I was like, I'm gonna keep going now that I found this thing that I love. And it's like an area of study. I'm just gonna keep going. So the creative dissertation was really a similar process to putting together the MFA thesis. Um, in that you have a lot of reading that you're doing and a lot of writing that you're doing. In addition to that, you choose a couple of like specialty areas and you have reading lists of like, 100 books or more, and then you take an exam. And so actually that, Bennington was really rigorous in terms of having a lot of reading and a lot of critical writing alongside the creative writing. So that really did prepare me well to have, they were like, here's 100 books to read. And I was like, I read 100 books at Bennington. I can do it again. So it really, it kicked it up a notch in a way because it also, there's like a teaching and a research focus that's incorporated into that. But in terms of the creative process, it was really similar.
What were your specialties?
Oh, I mean, they were general, like poetry and literature. But I did specifically look at literature written by women and mostly women of color, because I felt that was kind of a gap that I had in my reading knowledge. And so that was very specifically made to speak to those areas that I wanted to, become more well read in. And then for the poetry, a lot of it, interestingly, a lot of it also was written by women, but I also read a lot of elegy. I'm really interested in kind of like the next project that I'm formulating, is kind of an elegy. And so I was able to focus some of my reading thinking about future projects. So that was helpful
Nice. So
too.
out of all that reading, who are your influences? And I guess I'm asking kind of two questions. Who are your influences in general, but also for
Mhm.
this particular book, who,
Yeah.
who were you sort of, drawing inspiration from?
Yeah, I love that, of course. Well, I so when I first picked up Claudia Emerson's Late Wife, that book just like I felt an immediate kinship to it. In the narrative, this speaker like leaves the marriage and then begins a relationship with a widower and considers the late wife. And so that I was like, Claudia, this is my life, so I felt like this real connection. And she also has, a series of sonnets in there as well. So that book like arrived to me like at Bennington, like at the exact right time when I was kind of starting to formulate what it might look like. But in terms of other influences, like I love Layla Chatti's work. Like there's just such a lushness of language, but also like a vulnerability in the telling that becomes kind of like this reclamation of power. It becomes this source of strength. And I love that and hope that I would emulate it in any way. But I also love and really feel like perhaps my work might be in conversation with, or just in my head, I'm in conversation with Dorothy Alasky and Jenny Molberg, especially Jenny Molberg's most recent work, which I think is just fantastic. And then, of course, Sylvia Plath, like the grandmother of us all, I think. But the folks that I'm really excited about right now, I love C.A. Conrad. I love their somatic writing rituals and their work. It's something that I'm really trying to do in my own writing life, is like to create this like ritual that can be consistent and ground me in the present and be inspirational for work. So I really love, I love what they're doing. And the education that they do as well. And then Rosebud Ben-Oni, I just love how weird and wild her work is, and that she incorporates science. And Cia Conrad and Rosebud Ben-Oni, I don't think we write anything like each other, but I do like just draw so much inspiration from them. And I think sometimes I can see resonances with certain writers. But often it's the folks that are doing something completely unlike what I am doing that I find the most inspirational.
Same, totally. Yeah. It's such a gift to like be able to read widely and to draw from everything, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, who are you reading right now?
Oh, well, so I have some books right here. So one of the things when I graduated with my PhD and I got a job, and I was actually like making enough money to like, purchase books without feeling guilty, or, taking books out from the library, which I love to do, but like I love to like write in a book and fold the pages and, so I told myself like I'm just gonna any book that I want, I'm just gonna order it. Like, this is the thing that I'm gonna do now that I feel like I'm a real adult with a real job. So I have a lot of like awesome books that I get in the mail all the time. So this one, Root Fractures by Diana Coy Wynn. This is her new book. And her book Ghost of is just incredible, and kind of changed the way that I think about poetry and what it looks like on the page, and also writing from a space of grief and what that elegy can kind of look like. So I'm really excited to jump into her work. And then Eugenia Lee's new book, Bianca, which I'm like just obsessed with this cover already. I'm really excited. I haven't read either of these yet, but they're on my to be read list. And then Mosab Ahu Toha's book I just got in the mail. I've read a lot. I think probably a lot of us have read a lot of his work on social media and in other forms. And I'm excited to have like the actual book in my hands. I think that's really important. But I love reading poetry, but also I love fiction so much. And so fiction is kind of like the thing I turn to when I want to be most entertained. And so I just got Tommy Orange's new book in the mail as well. So the sequel to There, which is just, I can't wait to dive in. And then I just finished this book that I want to share by Tamim Frucher, City of Laughter, which is just an incredible novel, like a queer reimagining of family history and storytelling and folklore. And it's just a delight, an absolute delight. So I just finished that one. So I'm ready to read something else. But those are the ones I'm really excited about at the moment.
Ah, I feel the excitement. That's so great. And there's nothing like having a stack of books, is there, that you're excited about? It's the best.
Mhm.
So to close out, I would love to hear you read a few poems from your new book.
Well, I would love to read some for you. How much space and time do we have? How many? I have like just a little compendium here, but how many do you think?
I think about it as like a representative kind of sampling. So if someone's thinking that they want to buy your book and they're on the fence, let's tip them over into the definitely ordering this book right now camp.
Okay.
Show
I
them
like that.
in.
Wonderful. Well, so then I'll read the first poem that appears before the first section.
I love that
Because
one.
oh,
Yeah.
yay. So, it definitely is kind of a meditation on wife, but also, like, thinking about kind of how wives have been represented in fairy tales, which I like to think about as well. So all of these examples are kind of pulled from real fairy tales about wives and, what they do and what they become, and what they're made of, and it's called The Wife. It's just a blank, like a fill in the blank wife. And then throughout the poem, there are forward slashes that I'll just kind of take a short pause to indicate. And it's really, that's where the kind of interchangeableness of what the wife is or needs to do comes to life. So the wife. The wife is a disguise, a crane, a fox, a fish, a seal whose skin is left on a rocky inlet, who plucks out each of her opulent feathers, who sweeps the floor with her tail, who cooks her own limb for the soup and the sack of rice, the cupboard. Her womb fills and refills, and the man owns her, and she owes him sustenance, sex, money, immortality, offspring, death, and she disappears into the waves, wind, hills, leaving the man a box of gold, her eyes, a child, her fat, magical heart. And I'll read one of the kind of tarot character poems as well. This one is called The Soldier. When his stepdad came home early, we hid with our noses touching beneath his bellowed bed. My little earth mover, star shaker, helmeted hair trigger whose fingers laced tight in mine on the playground where he pushed me down, then grasped my hand to pull me up. We played Jesus and Pontius, took turns as prodding Thomas, our fingers searching out tender tears. My little atheist, gladiate gift giver and tide taker, thumb screwed, soft bellied tough guy, tumbling to take the box of matches when we played Joan of Arc, singeing my braids, putting them out in his mouth. Now you be the executioner. I heard he died in a sandstorm, but that was rumor, for he was swordbreaker, soapboxer, chaser of afterwinds, anointer of wicked women. I still touch the scar where he wondered, what do you look like under all that skin? My little bottlehead whose throat had no choke point, even after so many pulls and pills, I can still hear him singing, chewing a cigarette between his teeth. Come on, baby, light the fire. So that one has a little witchcraft in it too. Um, so I'll read another one that's more specifically witchy for burning. "You're a witch," he told me once, but he meant it good. Then punched the windshield until it buckled, spider webbing around his fist. I thought I had the gift, but all I had was salt, black smudge, smoke. What lack, what trick? I casted shadows and aspersions. He punched the windshield until it buckled. Spiderwebbed veins thumping in his arm. His body was a gift, kaleidoscope of black, of oak. Lack of light, trick of shadow, power cast as poison. More than once I slipped into his bed when I belonged to another. Vain jump into his hands, his gift of kaleidoscopic body. So many faces refracted in a cut glass of whiskey, so much noise. Once I slipped into his bed when I belonged to another, then another, and another, a madness of matrimonies, so many faces refracted in a cut glass of whiskey, such bliss in the gift of his fist. I thought he was a home, but he was only sand, a ruin of waves, another, then another, an insanity of sorceries. You're a witch, he told me once, but I misunderstood. And that one is a pantoum. And speaking of revision, I think a great way to approach revision is to throw the poem into a form. This one I wanted to write as a pantoum because I love that repetition and that callback. I mean, talking about like reflection, it's just full of reflection and remaking. So I think form can be a great way to revise and also a great way to invent. Um, this next one is called In Between Country, and it's certainly about Oklahoma. And it's also a haibun, which is a prose poem that then ends with a haiku. In Between Country. Pinch yourself, awake again. The car is moving, the two cats napping among the potted plants, untidy boxes. Your palms circle the peeling steering wheel, flakes of vinyl freckling your naked legs. You touch each sharp nick in the glass, trace each missing dial. The old car chugs on anyway. Hot air slips through the cracks like a thick slice of heat. The long drive bristles, a popped tire, goat head thorns sticking to your every edge as you spin the lug wrench, sweat. Musk thistles bloom roadside, bursts of purple on the thirsty plain. On the edge of the empty two-lane highway, you piss on the concrete as the cats stalk, careful, through the grass. They know not to wander too far. You know nothing. This is the in-between, flatlands empty but for gutted motels and lone hawks circling and you cutting through it in your hot metal box like a thrash of thunder. Behind you, mountains, your heart in another person's body. Ahead, latitude, prairie grass pretty as desert sand. In Oklahoma, heat glistens. Armadillo roadkill waves you home. The armadillo is so Oklahoma. um, one more. Okay. So this one is called Flight. This is another one that underwent quite a significant bit of revision. Um, and it's about being at a butterfly house surrounded by butterflies, which is something I love. Flight. At the butterfly house, I see the blue morpho, a blue so big it's almost terrible when it flaps by. The happy guy who works here is my flight attendant. Humid rooms draped in netting like widows. Waves of wings wash the sunlight into underwater. Under wing, I still, hoping one might anchor. Morpho Menelaus, blue and burning king of wrath and wound, circling. This is a butterfly, says the attendant, softly poking a leaf. The leaf takes flight, a trick. Papilio Helenus, apple-cheeked, red and writhing, evolves into hiding. Visitors with costly cameras shoo me away as if they might capture this magic of intricacies so minuscule and miracle. Tiny gold hairs glint for a moment in light, wings webbed as leaf vein, so slight they are see-through. Hands in my pockets, fear of my fingers and their fragmenting touch. Red Helen lands and alights, a body stolen again and again by wind. At the house's heart, a case of chrysalis cocooned. Such care for a creature that lives only days. Such time is meager measure. At the sight of Helen's open robe, Menelaus dropped his sword. Check for hitchhikers, reads the exit sign at the wind tunnel. Truth is, no naked breast sways me. An escaping butterfly unsticks from between my shoulder blades, gently propelled back into its safe blue prison. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really loved having this chat with you and hearing your work. And I'm so excited about this book launching into the world. It's absolutely gorgeous. Congratulations again.
Thank you so much, Rena. Thank you for doing this with me. It's so lovely to see you. And I appreciate you and everything that you do for poetry. You and your teaching in your bookstore. What a wonderful, safe place in the world that you've created. And I appreciate you for welcoming me into it, if only virtually.
Oh, thank you so much.